A group of us have been gathering for spoken morning prayer. All are invited. We've been centering ourselves using the most ancient words of our faith, the Book of Psalms. Along the way, we've made some pit stops, first to visit with the Lord's Prayer, and then for what some of us felt was an unending visit to wrestle with the Apostles' Creed. On Mondays, we offer our prayers of hope for the week ahead, and on Fridays, at the suggestion of one of our members, we share our gratitudes for the week that has passed. We share stories of gardens and bird song. We celebrate the arrival of new trees and commiserate alongside with one another when it turns out the wild raspberries one of us was growing turned out to be poison ivy. Pets make themselves known, birthdays and grandchildren and parents are remembered, and we are sent out every day with a child's blessing. Morning prayer is basically everything you love about church, while still having a second cup of coffee, or for one of us, a lovingly prepared cup of tea in your living room or in your kitchen, on a front stoop, or from Michigan or Florida or Canada. The Book of Psalms is our guide because in it are all the emotions of humanity. The psalmist is a wonderfully diverse writer and a very real person. There are times when they write with the trumpets of angels proclaiming pure joy and declarations of praise. At other times, they write words of comfort for their afflicted soul, remembering whose and who they are. They get mad and they rail with anger. There are moments when they're afraid and moments when they are in despair. The psalmist knows what it is to be human and knows how to talk to God. They are teaching us that it is okay to feel all the feelings and to bring them all to God. Now, but sometimes also to the chief musician, like Psalm 20 or 109 or 75. Some of the Psalms have picked up titles by writers and editors of study Bibles or just by common parlance over the year. Tradition has given roles to certain Psalms. Psalm 150, the last of the Psalms, often said or sung on Sundays when the sacrament of communion is celebrated. Or in our own case, it's the final Psalm of the week that we read each Friday. Psalm 23, the Lord is my shepherd, is practically required reading for funerals, and I'll warn you that if you're ever asked to read it, don't try to do it in any version other than the King James. The Psalms give us beautiful images, deer panting by streams, rivers clapping their hands, imagine that, and mountains breaking forth into song. Promises of help and resurrection and of protection coming when we do something as simple as lift up our eyes to the hills. Psalm 13, which Sean read for us this morning, or the chief musician, and it is a Psalm of David. In it, the psalmist is in anguish and feels deserted by God. They feel God has abandoned them and a very human other is oppressing them. So distraught are they that they risk thinking about the sleep of death, a line famously quoted by Shakespeare in another speech by a distraught young man struggling with who he is and parents who don't understand him. Now, we've all had moments of despair, of that much I am sure. And for some of the psalmist's worry, for some folks, the psalmist's worry, if this doesn't get better, I'll die, is all too much a part of their story. 51 years ago, transgender women of color said enough to police brutality and discrimination against LGBTQ people. And today we celebrate the history of pride, and we imagine a world where each person may be proud of who they are and live as fully as their God created them to be. The first Pride in a bar downtown was a riot. Most years since then, as Sam just said, there's been a march. But this year, there are any number of virtual gatherings and celebrations all across the world. Just as notable this year, Pride comes not as a standalone holiday or the month of June, but as part of a series of 3 holidays that together offer us a frame for liberation. Juneteenth, the commemoration of freedom for the final enslaved Africans inhumanely held captive in Texas. A holiday of remembrance of freedom, a celebration of Blackness, a call to justice. Pride, the history of LGBTQ people, the celebration of gender and sexual and relational diversity, and a call to life. And the final of the Trivecta, next week, the 224th anniversary of these United States of America, declaring our freedom, the remembrance of the declaration that all men are created equal, and a demand for justice to expand that scope, to welcome women to the equation, and to call for justice, not just for unity. Taken together, these three holidays make this liberation season a time that comes over the summer solstice when the days are longest and the nights hottest. A time when we might proclaim Black Lives Matter, revel that queer lives matter, and declare independence from all that oppresses us. In the Gospel of Matthew, Jesus lays out a formula for spreading good news and passing God's love like wildfire. If someone welcomes you, Jesus says, they welcome me too. And whoever welcomes me, he goes on, welcomes the one who sent me, connecting the peace of Christ and of Creator through an associative property. And then he goes on, anyone who welcomes a prophet by using another prophet's name will receive a prophet's reward. Do you hear the interplay of faith that's baked into this sentence? The call to interfaith dialogue and understanding, the welcoming one prophet by naming another prophet. And then you yourself receive a prophet's reward. There's play here as Jesus moves from association to dialogue. But where it really gets interesting is the third line when Jesus starts speaking about righteousness. Listen to what he says to you. If you welcome a righteous person by naming another righteous person, then you yourself will receive the reward of righteousness. How do you become righteous? Not until you can name at least two other righteous people, people who are not you, people who may not look like you, or think like you, or love like you, but you must name them, and name them as righteous. You must first welcome another person's righteousness, and then you must welcome them in the name of still another person's righteousness. And then, and only then, does the equation of if A equals B and B equals C, then your righteousness is equal to the righteousness of who is the transitive property many of us learned in geometry classes so long ago. This is also the transitive property of liberation season, a season in which we people of faith might center our work in liberation theology. Liberation theology is the justice-seeking faith work that begins by understanding that my liberation is bound up with your liberation. There is no justice for me until there is justice for you. There is no freedom for me until there is freedom for you. There is no peace for me until there is peace for you. This is a practical theological exercise that helps us practice Jesus's transitive command. If you want to know peace, you must know justice. There is no LGBTQ justice without also working for Black, Indigenous, people of color justice. Liberation is a collaborative exercise. It requires meeting at places where our lives intersect, the places that bring us the most joy, and the places that cause us the most pain, and learning how to liberate each other if we really want to be free ourselves. This is justice making. It begins by welcoming another in the name of yet another, and in doing so, welcoming God. And this is hard. This is so hard because we do not yet speak the language of each other well, or right, or authentically. We make mistakes in welcoming the ones we don't yet know, and our language has its limits and it often fails us. And again, Intersectionality and transitive properties help us here. They allow for grace-filled learning, for deep listening, for checking ourselves, and for naming what needs to be named. Liberation theology, like liberation season, is about accountability, diversity, justice, and even pride. How long, O Lord, how long, the psalmist cries. They feel forgotten and unseen and unknown. They feel alone. Now, these are not feelings unique to LGBTQ folk, but they are certainly feelings known by LGBTQ folk. Folk like the 3 in 10 young trans people that attempted to sleep the sleep of death last year. Or folks like the 15% of young lesbian, gay, and bisexual people who attempted to take their lives last year. How long, O Lord, how long? The psalmist knows our despair and gives a hope that it does indeed get better. It can get better. It must get better. When I work for your liberation, by naming the liberation of another, I will find my liberation. And when you work for your liberation, by naming the liberation of still another, you will find your liberation. As we consider whose liberation and righteousness we must name, here's a partial list, a very incomplete list. Black lives matter. Queer lives matter. Trans lives matter. Children's lives matter. Women's lives matter. Your life matters. Who among us isn't ready to make this so? Live by proclaiming these lives that are not yours matter, and then name another life that matters too. Live by working for liberation and justice, and you too will know liberation and justice. Put your heart into it. Lean into it. Live like your life depends on it. It does. If a butterfly can flap its wings and change the tidal currents across the globe, then truly one more life demanding justice, equity, and inclusion may just be the voice we've been waiting for. Look to God, who deals bountifully with all God's people. Give a cup of cool water to even the little ones. Welcome the ones on the margins to the center and listen to their story. And truly, truly, Jesus tells us, no one will lose their reward. Happy Pride. Happy Liberation Season. Amen.